Hi guys, it's Grandpa and it's time for Nana's story time again, but we can't get Nana to do any stories, so I'm going to do another one. And tonight we're going to do The Simple Prince by Jane Yolen. Okay? And this is a book that we've had around for, I remember we had it in Arizona when Nathan was born, so we've had it for over 20 years, and it's one that I've always liked. So, The Simple Prince by Jane Yolen. And Allie's working the camera, so I will try to do what she tells me to do with the books here. There was once a prince who longed to live the simple life. He was tired of the idle foolishness and the fancy dress balls. See, he was just tired of all the fancy stuff being a prince. So he clapped his hands 3 times to call his servants. "Bring me some plain clothes," he demanded. "I am going out into the world to live the simple life." The servants found a plain suit and a plain hat as well. The prince clapped his hands 3 times and ordered a simple lunch to eat on his way. We should have somebody clapping their hands 3 times as I read this story. Then he rode off to find the simple life. He rode for many hours until at last he came to a house of a poor farmer. "If I cannot live the simple life here," he said, "then I cannot live it anywhere." The prince got off his horse and went to the door. He clapped his hands 3 times, but nothing happened. He snapped his fingers. He tapped his toes. At last he grew impatient. "Open up!" he shouted. The door was opened, and the farmer looked out. And you can see the little pig scurrying away there when he ordered the door to open up. "I have come to live the simple life," said the prince. He walked inside the farmer's house. The farmer stared at his wife. She stared at the prince, but the prince did not notice. Instead, he went around the room with his handkerchief to his nose. "What an awful smell," said the prince. "Is this what comes from living the simple life?" "No," said the farmer's wife. "It comes from making cheese." "Cheese," said the prince, and he sat down on a stool and clapped his hands 3 times. "I want some cheese and a cup of tea to go with it. I have been on the road for so long, looking for the simple life, that I am quite starved." The farmer looked at his wife. She shook her head. "No good will come of this," she said, but the farmer just smiled. He cut the prince a slice of cheese. Then he said, "Cheese and tea, that is simple. Here is the cheese. But as for the tea, we need some fire and water. First I must saw the wood for the fire. It is simple. Come with me." The prince went outside with the farmer. They found some wood, and they sawed, and they sawed, and they sawed some more. The wood pile grew bigger and bigger. At last the prince cried out, "Enough, enough! I can do no more." "We are done," said the farmer. He loaded the prince's arms with the wood and led him back to the house. Then the farmer made the fire. The prince sat down again. "Now it is time to get the water," said the farmer's wife. "It is simple. Come with me." So the prince followed the farmer's wife to the well. Arm over arm, he pulled the bucket up. He poured the bucket into a pitcher. One bucket, then another, and then another. At last the prince cried, "Enough, enough, I can take no more." "We are done," said the farmer's wife. And she gave the prince a pitcher for each hand, and she put a pitcher on his head, and then she led him back to the house. The farmer's wife poured the water into the kettle and put the kettle on the fire. When it was hot, she made the tea. But the prince was twice as hungry as before. The prince clapped his hands 3 times. "Bring me some bread and butter with my tea." "That is simple enough," said the farmer. "But butter begins with milk, and milk comes from a cow. Come along with me." So the prince followed the farmer to the barn. There he held a pail while the farmer milked the cow. The cow's tail hit the prince in his face. The cow's hooves kicked the prince's knees. At last the prince cried out, "Enough, enough, I can do no more." "It is done," said the farmer. Back in the house, the farmer made the prince churn and churn and churn the milk into butter. When it was done, the prince fell back on the stool. He clapped his hands feebly 3 times. "My butter needs some bread," he said. "That is simple," said the farmer's wife. "But first, we have to bake it. Come along with me." She rolled up the prince's sleeves and gave him a big lump of bread dough. He kneaded it, he patted it, he punched it, and at last he cried, "Enough, enough, I can take no more." "It's done," said the farmer's wife. And she put the dough into the oven to bake. But the prince was so tired from sawing and hauling, from milling and churning, from kneading and pounding, that he fell fast asleep. He slept through the bread baking and dinner and did not wake up until morning. He felt stiff and tired and cranky. He tried to clap his hands 1 time, 2 times feebly, 3 times very feebly. But his hands were much too sore from all the work he had done. "Please," he said weakly, "may I have something to eat?" "It's simple," the farmer's wife began. But before she could finish, the prince jumped up from the stool. "Enough, enough, I can live no more of the simple life. It is much too hard for me." He ran out the door, he climbed on his horse, and he galloped back to the castle as fast as he could go. His servants helped him off the horse, and the grateful prince said, "Thank you." And then he asked, "Please, may I have some porridge? I am quite starved." His servants rejoiced at being treated so politely and went quickly to fetch the porridge and a pitcher of fresh milk. And from that day to this, the prince lived happily, never again clapping his hands for anything. Instead, he was always careful to say please and thank you. And it is so much simpler that way. So I hope that you will always be like the simple prince and say please and thank you. So that's our story. We'll see you again next time. Bye.